Hello! Welcome to another edition of Sun Dragon Tips and Tricks. I'm Rebecca. I'm the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber in Brevard, North Carolina. And today, I think for knitting, something that I have been avoiding quite a bit has been how to weave in your ends. So what to do when you're done with your knitting and you have all these ends hanging off. And we're going to do Sun Dragon style, how I like to do it. This is the knitting edition. I will try to make another one that is crochet edition in terms of how you weave those ends in. Now I like to do it with the back side of the work, so the side that hopefully won't be as visible, so you won't notice it as much. And we're going to talk about the technique that I try to teach in the shop, which is I call up and down and back and forth. You really want to mess with it as much as you can so that it's going to take acrobatics to pull it back out again. My biggest rule of thumb is I do not tie knots. I do not tie knots because knots will leave a hard bump in the middle of your work or at the edge of your work. And if you tie a knot and you cut it really close, what if it wasn't tight enough? Or what if through the acrobatics I was talking about, it comes undone? So we leave a long tail, at least 6 inches, and we weave it in to the point where it's going to take a while for it to come out. And some of you may not believe this works. I can show you sweaters that are at least 10 years old. Before I learned my up and down and back and forth, I was at least going up and down and splitting backs of yarn, and still hasn't come out. So some version of this, whatever you want to come up with, will work. I'm going to show you what I do. All right, so let's get to it. Let's run you through some of the basics in terms of weaving in ends. Weaving in, we're really sewing, but it's like I said, up and down and back and forth. It's kind of weaving it amongst the back of your fabric. So, knit edition, Sun Dragon style. Like I said, we will be doing a crochet edition at some point in the future. Maybe sooner, maybe later. I'm not sure yet. So, I find it's important to leave, you'll find in most books it'll talk about leaving at least 6 inches of yarn. You need to leave enough that you can thread a needle. You need to be able to thread a needle. And we're talking about a sewing needle here. And have room to sew. If you have the edge of your work, this is my garbled edge of my work, and your tail is only, say, 1 inch, it's going to be too short. You can't get that in. There are ways, if you have a tail that is shorter than 6 inches because you played yarn chicken, there are ways to fudge this, but let's talk about giving ourselves space to start. So, yeah, there's my punny joke of the day. You're going to be sewing it in with a big-eyed needle. Let me show you. Looks like this. You'll see when we actually get to the yarn. Something with a big enough eye to stick your yarn through, and it doesn't really need to be sharp. This is not a sharp needle. Because you mostly are going to do this by going under the yarn. You can go through it, but I'll show you the technique where we go under. My phrasing, I like to call it the up and down and back and forth. Essentially, you want to be going all different directions, but if possible, it's an organized all directions. There's 2 reasons for that. It's harder for it to come out and it's less visible on the front. Harder to pull out over time, and it's less visible when you're wearing it. If you just went up through a bunch of stitches, chances are you would see it on the other side. So I'm going to be showing you the technique of following the path of the yarn. If you can see it, not everyone can see this right away. I have a diagram over on the other side, and we will talk about it. If you can't see it, you just still want to try to go for that up and down and back and forth in different directions. I recommend doing this on the back side of the work if possible. And I say if possible because it could be a scarf where you're going to see both sides. So do it on the side you think will not be shown as much. When at all possible, I use what I call the purl bumps as my guide. The purl bumps tend to look more like horizontal bumps, horizontal lumps. And it's much easier to go in and out and back and forth on that than it is on the V-stitches. It's harder to snake in and out and hide things on the V-stitches, whereas the purl bumps, or what I call the turtlenecks, you can do your up and down and a little bit of back and forth, which I'll show you over there. As I mentioned in the intro, I never tie knots. If you do the up and down and back and forth enough, you really don't need to. You really shouldn't need to. Let's take a look at dissecting a little bit of what is happening with the yarn. This is a picture I have drawn of the back side of stockinette fabric. Stockinette is where you knit one row and you purl one row. And if we took something somewhere in the middle of this, like I'll take this top row up here, it can look just like a whole bunch of lumps, right? But if we start over here and we follow the trail of the yarn, it goes up here. It goes over and around. It goes back down. It goes under, up, over and around, back under through the same hole it just came out of, under and around, up and over. We can say it's going up to the right, over to the left, back down to the right. It goes back under that same loop it came out of just a couple seconds ago. Under to the left, up to the right, over to the left, back to the right, under that same one. And this keeps happening. Up to the right, over to the left, down to the right, ends up going through that same lump, over to the left. That is what is happening with your yarn. If you can follow that, that can be really helpful for tying in your ends. Really, really helpful for tying in your ends. Sometimes your yarn will be over here and that's the direction you're moving, and sometimes it'll be over here and you'll be moving the other way. So let's see if we can find, with another color, let's show you on the next row down. So the red one started over here. Let's show you a blue one that starts over here. So let's say we wanted to go up in this way. This yarn, it goes under this loop, up over to the left, up and around to the right, and back down to the left. It ends up going through that same lump, the same purl bump it just traveled up through and came back down through. This goes under and over to the right, under this guy, up, and under this one, up to the left, over to the right, under to the left, back under this same guy, and so forth. So here's it coming from the other direction. Now let's say this was my end and I wanted to sew it in. Let's find another color. I'm going to try it with my orange, which means it's going to get dirty. What I would do if I'm starting down here, I want to do the same track of this blue, but I need to get, if I go under, if I start by going under this, it'll come undone. So I actually need to skip over, hop over, so I can get under this top guy. to start weaving in. And once I get caught under here, I'm going to follow the track of the yarn with this guy. So I will go over. Here's where, and I'm going to draw a diagram underneath this with just some geometry. I will take my needle, and this is the back and forth part. I'm going to be going up and down, down, up, down, up. But I'm also going to go back and forth this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then this way. I'm going to go back and forth. And believe it or not, if I just do that 3 or 4 times, it should be enough. So what I would do with the needle is I would stick it, once I went up this way and under, I would go straight under these two. I would stick my needle like that and then come around. So that was going this direction. And then I would stick my needle straight up through these two. This is starting to get confusing looking, right? And then straight down. That's how I would sew it in. Back and forth. And if you notice, these points right here, there's points where I'm going through a spot I've already gone through before. Again, if this is getting at all confusing, hang with me and we'll try to diagram it out. So another way to think about this is to think about triangles. Okay? To think about triangles. So let's say we started 1, 2, 3 points to a triangle. My first leg, I'm going to go up 1 to 2. I'm going to go over 2 to 3. And I'm going to angle back down. I'm going to go through point 1 again. Then I'm going to come over. This will be point 4. And then I'm going to go back through point 3. Over to a new point directly across from it. This is another thing to stay on track. We're going to be moving parallel. Bottoms and tops, we're going to be moving parallel. So point 3, I'm going to move over to the next spot I can find, which I'm going to call point 5. And I'm going to go back through point 4. Over horizontally to the next point I can find, I'll call it 6. And up through point 5 again. Over to the next point I can find, let's call him 7. Back down through point 6. Over, let's call it 8. Back through, angle back through what I just went through. So there's a lot going on there in terms of sewing your ends in. But again, up here, from 1 to 2 to 3, back to 1. Then over and up, over and down. Another way to think about it, again, I am doing so many different things here because a different thing might stick for different people. So another way to think about this is I'm going to take the numbers out of it in case that was confusing. I'm going to go up to the right at an angle, a right leaning angle. I'm going to go straight over, and I'm going to come down. This is also going to the right, but instead of going up, I'm coming down. I'm also going back to the right. I'm going over. I'm angling back to the right. I'm going over. I'm angling down to the right. Over. Up to the right. You're kind of going back on yourself. You're going over and back and over and back. So we can think about that. Let me make sure I'm getting all my arrows in here. Over, back the way you came. Over, back the way you came. Over, back the way you came. So I'm going to call this diagram my over, we go over to the left, angle back to the right. And if you're going from the other direction, you just flip it. So you go one direction straight, angle back. One direction straight, angle back. There are many different ways to think about this. You pick the one that makes sense to you instead of getting overwhelmed by all of them. Let's see what it looks like with real yarn. So here is my sample. And I have a couple different ends. I have an end down here in the garter. I only talked about stockinette. We're going to hang on to that for a second. And I actually put a spot right in the middle. See this hole? It's not really a hole. It's where I have started and ended two different pieces. And we are going to show you how to close that gap so there isn't a hole there anymore. Here are my two ends, at least 6 inches. And here's the first thing I'm going to do. So I'm going to try to close this gap before I forget where it is. So I'm going to take the one that is on the left. I'm going to thread my needle. There are needle threaders if you are not experienced with putting bulky yarn on that needle. And these strands are both coming down. And see if I tug on them, I can see what's moving is the first track that this yarn comes out of. And if I tug on this one, do you see how that spot right there moves? That's showing me the other track. So I want to cross the streams, as I like to call it. Nice, good 80s Ghostbuster reference. These are both coming down. So I'm going to take this side up over here. I'm going to find the purl bump that this one's coming down through this and this. So I'm going to go back up through both of them. Remember, I'm over here on the left. I'm going over, but then I'm going up to the left. So that closes this gap. And before I lose track of where that was, I'm going to do this one too. So I'm going to thread my needle with this guy. And if I tug on him, I can see that moves. This is the yarn I'm following now. I was here. This yarn's coming from under this bump. So I'm going to go to the next bump directly next to it. If I took the needle, this one, I'm going over to this one. I'm going to go under it. And I'm going to go back the direction that I started from, which is over to the right. So I'm going to go over to the right. It's at, we could say, a 45-degree angle there. I like to do 2 strands at once because it can help me see where I'm going and where I've been. So this is the one I just came up through. I'm going to move over to the left. This is the one, I'm following the track of this yarn right here. But what we want to remember is I came up here. I'm going to go over one to go down, but then I need to angle back the way I came. These are these interior ridges. I'm going back the way I came, back to the right. I'm going to pull it snug, but not super tight. I don't want to tighten this area up. It's already going to get bulky. And if I over tighten it, it'll really be visible on the other side. So I just came down under this guy. I'm going to go to the next one. These guys are almost like kissing cousins here. It's probably a bad phrase to use, but you know. They're touching almost right there. Here's the one I came down through. I'm going to go over to the left, but I also want to angle back to the right. These are those acrobatics that it won't come out through. Pull it until it's snug. Loosen it up a little if I have to. I just came up through this one. I'm following the track of this yarn. I'm going to go over to this lump. So over to the left and go back to the right. He's here to remind me where I started. I've already done this 2 or 3 times. I can do it maybe one more time, maybe 2, but we don't really need to do more than that. So just came down through here. I'm going to go over to the left to the next purl bump that's right here. I'm going to come up I'm going to angle back. Pull it snug. Let me do one more. I just came up through this one. I'm going to go to the next lump over and go down and then angle back to the right. Those are my triangles, over and up, over and down. Now, I'm going to cut him, and I could cut him super, super close, but I might leave a little, because guess what? This is going to relax a little bit, and it's going to pop out. It's almost impossible not to have your ends show at all, because if you do it so you can't see it at all, it might pop out. You could split strands. Those are other videos to talk about, not right now. So we just went to the left with this half. This half means I'm going to go to the right. If you're beginning and ending two strands of yarn, my rule of thumb, if it's not in the middle here, if it's at the edge somewhere, is do your best to not go over the same area. So this is already thick. We want to go this way. So right now, if I tug on this, he's coming up here. So I want to go over to the next one to the right and down to the left. I actually just came up through him when he started, but that was a few minutes ago. So this is the other thing to talk about with this strategy. This is the strand I came from here to here. So I'm going to go over one and go up. And in going back to the left, I'm actually going under the strand when I started this triangle. I went here to here. And now like A to B, C to A. And if we go over another one to the right, let's call this D, I'm going to go back to the left. I'm going to end up going under C. I just came up this way. I'm going to come down this way. So each of them I hit 2 times. In going over and then angling back, I'm going under the one I came under a couple of passes ago. I just came this way. Now I'm going that way. So whichever way it helps to think about it, if it just helps to say I'm going to go over to the right and down to the left, fantastic. If it helps to say I'm going over to the right and back through the one I came under at the very beginning of this triangle, that works too. Whatever works for you. And I just split my yarn right there, but that's okay. That sometimes when you split it in half can help tack it down. Let me go do one more. Over to the right, to the one that is horizontally right next to it. Back down the way you came, through the one you came up through in the beginning. Now if I snip that pretty close, I can still see my ends there. But most of this looks pretty good. And if we flip it back around, you can't see that hole. Is gone. We have covered it. Now, let me address what to do with garter. My take on it. Everyone's going to have different ways to weave in ends. But first of all, since I'm going to call this my front, I want to weave this end in on the same side. On the same side that I wove these ends in on. But down here, if you take a look, garter doesn't have all these flat bumps that it's really super easy to figure out what's happening. I like to use the garter, the purl ridges, almost the same way I would just use flat purl stitches up above. So I'm going to weave thread my needle, get my lingo right. And like I did in the video, I could start here, but it might unravel this a little bit. I'm going to pick a track. And I know there's extra stitches in here, but I am going to see if I can. I'm going to go in 1 stitch. I have a top hump and bottom humps on this purl ridge row. So I'm going to go under what I would call a bottom hump, an inside hump. This is inside and this is inside, and these are outside. Outside, outside. I'm going to go up. This might be seen a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to follow this outside hump and go through this inside hump. And remember, we're angling back the way we came. Since we're going left, we need to come back to the right. I'm skipping over the knit stitches in here. And I'm just going to pull this snug but not tight. I'm going to follow this outside hump, go under this inside hump, and angle back the way I came, which will be the one I started from. I went down, I'm going over, I'm going back. And I'm just reading the purl bumps, the purl ridges, rather than the stitches in between. I could try to follow the knit stitches in between, but I find this will work. I'm going to follow this outside hump to move me over, go under this inside hump, back the way I came, back under the one I just came up through. Snug and not tight. I'm going to follow this outside hump, up through the inside one, over back the way I came. And I think I'm going to clip it on the inside rather than clipping it where it will show more at the very bottom. I could have gone a couple more times, but again, as that tugs and settles, you may not see him very much. And there you go. I have woven in my ends. Thanks for joining us on talking about how to weave in ends. Sometimes people ask, when should they weave in their ends? This one, I'm not even done with it. But if you're seaming, so if you're sewing things together, I would wait on your edge ends. I wouldn't sew those in until you've sewn your pieces together, because you could end up with a really tight, bulky area where you're trying to where you're trying to seam your ends together, but because you've woven your ends in, it's really hard to see what you need to do, or it gets chunky. It doesn't look as clean. So I wait to weave in ends that are on the edges until after I've blocked and seamed. The other reason I might want to leave my tails, the one I just sewed in over here, the one I have up here if I cut this off, the other reason I might want to leave that end hanging and not sew it in yet is I might want to use it to sew my pieces together, rather than have a fresh piece of yarn with 2 more ends to weave in. So I might want to use it to sew the pieces together. Now, the thing I just showed y'all about the hole in the middle of this, where I had ended one piece of yarn and started another right in the middle. My advice on that is you may want to weave it in before you block. And part of the reason for that is blocking is about settling your work and regulating your stitches. And if you leave a hole there before you block, it may still look weird after you block and even after you sew your ends in. But it really is personal preference. I'm a big fan of learning by doing and learning by making mistakes. So the more you do, the more you learn, and the more you figure out what you want to do. Because you could end up wanting to sew your ends in a totally different way than what I do. You know, I'm cool with that. Anyway, so parting shots here. If you want Sun Dragon merchandise, hopefully that was in the camera at some point and not just the girls. If you want Sun Dragon merchandise, I'll put it in the links. You can order straight from the company that makes them or from us, and then we give them the order, and then they make them, and then we ship them to you, or you can pick them up at our shop. Please let me know if you'd like to do a one-on-one appointment with me. I'm doing them over Zoom. I am doing them in person on the plaza now, outside of our shop. Wednesdays and Fridays, open air, masks, lots of other things to make sure that we are both keeping each other healthy, and we're limiting time for those. So sometimes doing it in person is really the way to go, and sometimes if I can, let's talk it out over Zoom, do it virtually. So just contact me about that, because I definitely want to help everybody if I can. I'm hoping these videos are already helping you out. So may your crafting journeys be filled with joy and confidence. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing that bell so you know when I post new stuff, and at least giving it a thumbs up if you liked it. So, Who knows where the camera is right now? I hadn't tested. So anyway, I hope you all have a great Monday, a great week, and I will either see you here later today if I manage to get a second video done, or I'll see you next week. Or you can join Liz and I with the Sun Dragon Sideshow. We'll be filming that tomorrow. Or join our knit night and get the Sun Dragon Sideshow, The Adventures of Liz and Rebecca, the Liz and Rebecca show, in person as we get, because it's on Zoom right now. We love y'all. Have a good day. Hello, Your Majesty. You look like a pretzel. That's like the knitting I was doing. Do you feel like a pretzel? Yes. Oh, we're a quiet but snappy one today. I see that tail. That means I turned the camera off.